To start with, I'd like to explain why PwC has been working with QED in organising this event. So my professional background is one of an auditor. So I've been auditing companies in the UK for more than 20 years now. And as you all know, the purpose of audit is to give shareholders an opinion on the truth and fairness of a set of financial statements. So as an auditor, shareholders are my ultimate customer. They're the reason for my work, and they should be incredibly important, therefore. But I've also observed amongst my profession that, strangely, we don't spend a lot of time talking to shareholders. In the past, we've issued a fairly standard audit report at the end of the audit. That's what the shareholder gets, no questions, move on to the next audit. And that strikes me as a strange relationship between a service provider and its customer. So that got me to thinking more broadly about the role of the shareholder and about how those of us who are part of the capital markets ecosystem might work together with shareholders to make the capital markets work even better. And you'll notice there that I referred to the capital markets ecosystem, and I use that word ecosystem quite deliberately. So normally we think of an ecosystem in the natural world. So perhaps we might think about a pond with fish and frogs and pondweeds and flies and so on. And they live together in balance within the same ecosystem. And what we know from the natural world is that if you damage one element of the ecosystem, so let's say that the pondweed gets destroyed by some horrible pesticide, the whole thing falls apart. And then I would say it's the same thing in the capital markets. If we don't have every participant in the capital markets able to play their full role, then the whole of that system gets damaged. So on my first slide, I've set out a really simple picture of our ecosystem. So, of course, we've got companies and institutions with executive management, with non-executive oversight, and they get their capital from shareholders, and they give a return on that capital to shareholders. And, of course, they have to report to shareholders on how they've used that capital, and that's where my profession, the auditors, come in. And there's various regulators around the outside who make sure that no one is putting too much pesticide into the pond or the ecosystem. And when I look at this ecosystem, as well as equity shareholders, I think there are other participants who we have to think about. So shareholders supply equity share capital, but companies need other investors as well. They need their employees who provide them with human capital. They need natural resources, and they need the support of their local communities. So all of those things and those people also form part of this ecosystem. So today is definitely about the role of the shareholder, but it's also about all of our roles in this ecosystem. How can we all optimize what we do so that the capital markets work in the best possible way? So I think we need to explore the rights of shareholders, but also what responsibilities they take on in return for those rights. What sort of oversight of performance and governance should they be maintaining, and how might they do that? We need to think about the difference between the largest shareholders, who might have whole departments dedicated to that engagement, but also the smallest shareholders, who certainly don't. And we might need to recognise that the old adage of maximising shareholder value may sometimes harm other elements in the ecosystem, may impact that balance. So how do we balance our pursuit of shareholder value with the desire for responsible corporate behaviour? I'm sure we'll touch on that later. So as part of our thinking at PwC, we have just published the results. Let me flick on. Of our global investor survey, that's in this document. So that polls the opinions of shareholders and other investors from around the world. And we've got some full copies of the report outside if you're interested. We did this as a deliberate partner to a survey we do called the CEO survey, because we wanted to compare the views of CEOs from around the world with the views of shareholders and other investors, so two really important players in the ecosystem. And what this tells us is that, reassuringly, there are a lot of common views, So we have both CEOs and investors who agree that technology presents us all with a huge opportunity, but also a massive threat. They also share major concerns about political uncertainty, certainly front of mind for us all in Europe at the moment. And there's also signs of an emerging consensus on what we define as corporate success, which both CEOs and investors agree may not always be measured in terms of financial performance, but needs also to take account of other forms of impact, environmental, social, and so on. But there are some areas where we see differences in views. So CEOs, on the whole, much more optimistic than shareholders and investors about prospects for the global economy and about short to medium-term revenue growth for the companies. So please do take a look at that report. I'm sure you'll find it interesting. So on to the main event. As I said at the beginning, we've got a really great panel with us today, and I'm going to invite each of them to speak individually to set out their views before we open the floor to a bit more of a debate. So to kick us off, I'm really delighted to invite Jeroen Huyer to speak. Jeroen is Director of Civil Justice at DG Just in the Commission. And he's been working closely on the Shareholder Rights Directive, which I'm sure he will touch on today. So, Jeroen, can I invite you to take the lectern, please?